in my own experience, having started 9 companies and having like conceived many more that I just ended up not launching, I always look at it as the problem tends to find you. When I tend to talk to people about the ideas that they often have something to do with that interfacing with their life. I'll give you a good example. I don't know how popular it is anymore, but back in the day, Startup Weekend used to be a very big deal, right? Certainly in the States, and they had a great footprint around the world. And I used to go to those all the time. I love Startup Weekend. I love the vibe. You'd get people that would come up, and for those of you that aren't familiar, the concept was 100 people show up at a venue, all with entrepreneurial ideas. They pitch them on Friday night to the entire group. Then they self-organize around those ideas, the ideas that people love, and they work on them in some capacity for the next 54 hours, and they pitch them to a panel of judges and have kind of a mock judgment competition. When I looked at the genesis of those ideas over and over and over, every single person had a personal attachment to those. It was very rare where the person was like, I have no connection to this problem whatsoever, but I thought it was really important. I think it's better when it's a problem that you have. Startups.com is exactly like my entire life is the problem we solve at Startups.com, which is 40 million people per year want to start a business and 0 of them know what they're doing. And I was one of those people. And so was everyone else. So, going out there and helping people.
You at least had to have gone in and researched and wrapped your arms around the problem. Like you saw it and then you jumped in before you decided to try and do an MVP around it. Let's talk about ideas, MVPs. What advice would you give for all the founders that are with us at Startups.com right now? If they want to do what you did and recreate that success, because those opportunities aren't going to happen again.
Yep.
Right? What advice would you give today?
I would say make 1% gains. I think that's the part people are missing. Okay. So, you and I spend all day at Startups.com talking to founders, right? Nonstop all day long. And where I see folks miss the most, especially at first, when they're first in those MVP stages, they want big gains, right? If we're using the football analogy, they want 40-yard gains, right? Like right out of the gates. They're like, I want to launch and I want to get all these customers. And I'm like, dude, get 1 yard, right? But actually get it. Look for little tiny wins. Like, what does a little tiny win look like? Run a survey, get 100 people that say that they're interested in the product. Now run a newsletter to those 100 people. See if they even open it. See what content they open. Ask them questions. Engage them. Learn everything you could possibly learn. So those 1% gains, those tiny hits, are how you shape the thing. Here's why people screw it up. Here's why people get this so wrong. They're like, oh, I know exactly what the customer wants. I know exactly what the product should be. Ed, you see this all the time. I'm going to invest a ton of time. I'm going to go out there and put everything I've got. I'm going to spend 6 months. I'm going to spend $100,000 of my money, all this stuff. Get it out there. It goes over like a wet fart. And they don't understand, like, what did I do wrong? You didn't try to make small gains. You didn't stop at every point and say, okay, well, let me ask a few more questions. Let me ask a few more questions. My famous line when it comes to product development, and this is through experience, is this: I don't know the answer, and neither do you. And we talked about that, with our community last Friday, if you recall, when we were talking about our product roadmap. So I know a lot of you guys have thoughts about this in submissions, and I want to hear all of them. Just know, I don't know the answer, and neither do you. And that's why we're going to keep asking questions and make those 1% gains. That works so well.
I was sitting in a founder cohort yesterday, and yeah, like you said, talking to all the founders, and they were asking me, Ed, when should I start to try to sell what I've got going on? And I said, day one.
Yep,
as soon as you come up with the idea, put together a quick idea validation deck. And the best founders, in my experience, I don't know about you, the time between idea to actually getting a sale, even when the product's not ready, is so short. So they go out and they pitch and they're getting that feedback, that validation, and that feedback helps them iterate and do this continual improvement and figure out what to test. That's the advice I would give.
Yeah, and I tell people the same thing every time. You're already wrong. Find out why.
That's a good one.
Right? Because the other side of it, the other way to think about it is I'm right until I find out that I'm not right. Right? In other words, like I've thought about it. Ed, you and I have been on the whiteboard. We've got the whole thing mapped out. We launch it. It goes horrible. And we're so surprised. Or worse, we're so convinced that we were right that we torture the hell out of this thing trying to make it work. Whereas you could have taken a different approach, which says Startups.com is exactly this, by the way. I don't know exactly where I'm going to wind up or how I'm going to get there, but I know I want to be over there in some way, right? Here's what that looked like at Startups.com. When I conceived it 12 years ago, I said, I have no idea what the product is. Here's what I do know. These were like my base like directions. One, I know a lot of founders don't know what they're doing because I've talked to thousands of them and collectively they don't know what they're doing. And why would they, right? Why would they? So I felt that was true. The second thing I felt was there's like 90 ways to help founders, as you know, right? You can be funding or customer acquisition, whatever. And I'm like, I'm not sure which one is going to be a hot button for them. So I'm just going to start with one, which wound up being funding, which was an interesting journey, by the way, because I know people need funding. I know people understand that there's money and they understand they don't have it. And so I know there's something there. And we launched with that. That's what became Fundable, a portal, a platform to help people raise money. And that taught us everything. Here's why that was interesting, Ed. When we launched Fundable, it's 2011, 2012, the dawn of crowdfunding, the era of Kickstarter back in the day and things like that, right? When we launched Fundable, there were no less than 40 crowdfunding platforms that launched that year, right? So it wasn't like that was a unique idea. Everybody launched a crowdfunding platform. I had easily the most awkward dinner of my life with a good friend of mine back in LA. And we're at dinner catching up. And he's like, man, what are you working on? What are you working on? I'm like, hey, have you heard about this crowdfunding thing? He's like, oh my God, I love this crowd. You can see where this is going, right? And like halfway into it, we're like, well, shit. Yeah. And so we were literally starting the exact same thing. And our launch dates were like 3 days from each other. I remember like texting him being like, dude, we got to figure this out. Anyway, point is, we launched it thinking this is going to be $1 billion business, right? And it's just a race to success. What we learned pretty quickly was it wasn't $1 billion business because it turns out not that many companies can actually get funded online. But this is the difference. We didn't stop there. We didn't try to torture that thesis into success. We said, okay, what are we learning along the way? Turned out that a lot of founders needed help with pitch decks. They needed a lot of help with their customer acquisition. They needed help with like literally everything else. So what else could we do? And so we started to put together a thesis. What if we could help these founders at all the critical junctures, at their customer acquisition challenges, at their funding challenges, et cetera? And we started buying companies and building products to fit that whole journey. And that's what became Startups.com. Startups.com is an outgrowth of us listening, nothing else.